Now I want to talk to you about number 8, engaging the client in conversation. In reality, this can happen absolutely anytime in the evaluation. Anytime there's a natural bit where it's easy to start a conversation, I want you to do it. This can happen in the S1. It can happen at the beginning of the S2. Anytime like that is completely fine. But what you want to do is pick a topic that came up naturally and ask about it to see what kind of conversation you can get going. The examples I list here are, oh, you're based in Atlanta. I love this store that's there. Have you ever been? Or, oh, you're into Lego. Have you seen the Lego Masters TV show? And what you want to do is let that interaction go back and forth for a bit before you just insert comments without questions. Like, for example, oh, you like to travel? I'm going somewhere cool this weekend. Or, oh, I have pets too. What you're waiting to see is if people ask you, or if they ask any kind of follow-up question. They may or they may not, and this alone isn't necessarily diagnostic, but it is sometimes a good way to get useful information from clients. I'm going to show you this based on the engagement you have with the client and the way that conversation goes. You're going to get these questions at the end. Did the client respond to direct social questions? So when you say, have you ever watched the Lego Masters TV show? Most people are going to respond to that, right? Maybe not, but maybe. Did the client ask you questions? That's going to be less common, especially for maybe people who have more social emotional reciprocity challenges. Did the client appear comfortable in that back and forth? Maybe a client who hasn't seemed too anxious in the session so far, all of a sudden looked really anxious when you started asking social questions, right? You'll want to note that. Or maybe they just settled right into it and started chatting away. You'd want to note that. Did the interaction feel reciprocal? Did the client pick up when you just made a statement and ask you a further question? Did it feel natural? Did it have that back and forth kind of volleying? This is going to come up later when you do social emotional reciprocity in the S2, but especially when you write the report, because you're going to have some observations now that can go into that social emotional reciprocity section. I'm just going to put some notes in here so it doesn't give me a hard time about that. Okay. So once you've engaged the client in conversation, or you've skipped that and you've waited to do that later, the next section is making sure that forms that other people completed are valid. The way we do this, and we're not going to guarantee that it's valid, but it gives us a chance to at least know who's doing these forms. Just like we would in a live evaluation, we'd want to know who filled it out, how much do they know about you, do you think they're a good resource? So you can select the relationship of the person. Really important, make sure it's an adult who's done the form. Every once in a while, we've had a parent who's had their 10-year-old try to do the form or something like that. And these forms just aren't validated for having children do them. And then I'd ask, like, do you have a sense of how accurately they did the form? Like, do you think they know you really well and would be a good judge? And then you can say, sometimes clients will tell you, my mom knows me pretty well, but she doesn't think autism is a real thing. And I think she's going to really underreport. She always says nothing's really wrong with you. I think she's going to underreport. That doesn't mean we're not going to pay attention to or use these reference forms, but it gives us that context for understanding who completed the form and what they might be like. Same thing for that SCQ. So same thing for the childhood form. You need to indicate the relationship. For this form, it's particularly important that the client is choosing somebody who is at least 5 years older and who knew them really well in early childhood. So I could maybe do this for some of my cousins who are younger than I am. But maybe for others, I really couldn't. I had a lot of cousins. I didn't know some of them very well. I certainly couldn't do it for somebody who was only 3 years younger than me, right? You need to have that age difference, and then you have to have known you in early childhood. And then likewise, you select how accurately you think they reported. This is your chance to send out then any additional forms you might need. And I definitely urge you to send out supplemental forms. We have childhood supplemental forms, adult supplemental forms, but also therapist forms. So if they mention the therapist, you can certainly send them a supplemental form too. But what the supplemental form has is questions about all of the DSM criteria and whether or not the client showed those in session or in their interactions with the person. So this is another thing that'll take you to healthy. So I'm not logged in as a client. It's a little bit of a crapshoot where I'll go in healthy. But when you're logged in as a client, it'll take you to the form requests. And when you're in form requests, you can just follow these steps and you can send it. What happens is when you request a form, the request goes directly to your client who needs to fill out a release of information. And from there, the form is emailed directly to the rater they want to have complete that release form. So you don't see anything in your email, you don't see anything in the client's file until the completed form comes back. So don't worry if you don't see a completed form right away. But if you sent the request, you'll want to check in with your clients and make sure it's getting completed. All right, the next section is asking what brings people in. Why are they seeking evaluation? And all of the most popular answers are here. These are the ones we hear all the time. So you don't have to type out the whole thing. And this will also help you when you get to the report because it'll auto-populate a sentence for you in the report related to this. However, every once in a while you get something really unexpected and you can put other for that. We don't have a text box right there, but if it does happen, you can put it into the assessment scratch pad, remember? And we can paste that in later in the right spot. So you can have that information available later, just down here from the scratch pad. And then how did you decide to get an evaluation? Did someone suggest it? So were they self-referred? Did their doctor tell them to do it? Did a therapist tell them to do it? You have those options right there.